Kim. Hello, everyone. I'm Colin, and I have already been introduced. So it's nice to see so many people actually get involved with this and have a bit of an interest in how computing science assessments are put together. The main focus today is going to be on question papers, and we're going to start by looking at how the course is examined and how marks are allocated.
Thanks, Colin. Yeah, that's right. I think we should get straight to it. Make a start by looking at what information SQA actually provides about NQ assessments at both higher and N5 levels.
So we're only looking at higher and N5 because there's a separate advanced higher team. But in terms of higher and advanced in that 5 and higher, we've got the question paper and we've got the assignment. So those are our two things.
The question paper at both levels is worth 80 marks.
And the assignment's worth 40.
And across these two components, the tasks and questions should cover, and this is straight out of the SQA documentation, should cover breadth of the course, they should provide challenge, and they should require candidates to apply knowledge and skills gained in the course.
So that means that each SQA assessment should have that spread, and we should be testing content from both STD and the kind of optional side of database and web.
And it also means that candidates will be expected to apply their knowledge and skills to solve computing science problems and answer appropriately challenging questions that are set in familiar and unfamiliar contexts.
So tonight, we're just focusing on the question paper. We'll take a look at kind of practical tasks and the assignment in later sessions, but let's have a look at the kind of structure of the question paper.
SQA does provide an awful lot of information for teachers in the course specification documents for both N5 and higher levels, but it is spread across several pages and you have to trawl through them, flipping back and forward. So what you can see here is the structural details of a question paper, higher and N5 level, all collated and presented in a single table.
So the first thing to notice is the difference in duration. So National 5's an hour and a half and the higher exam is 2 hours.
And in fact, Colin, that's the only structural difference between the two levels. Both exams have a total of 80 marks that are split across the mandatory and optional sections.
So 55 of those marks are STD, and then 25 marks comes from either the database section or the web section, whichever optional section you choose to do.
And it's important to note that there is an additional requirement and that's one that's often overlooked by teachers when they prepare their own assessment materials. And that's the need for 50% of the marks in each section to be straightforward, what SQA refer to as C-mark questions.
So those C-mark questions are the ones that all candidates should be able to achieve. So they should be straightforward, they should be set in familiar contexts, and it's important to realise that that applies to each section of the question paper. So 50% of section 1, the STD stuff, should be C-mark questions, and 50% of section 2, 50% of section 3 should also be C-mark questions.
That's correct, Colin. But the tricky thing is to remember in summative assessments like this is that 30% of the marks must be allocated to A-type questions. And that's right across the question paper. So that's 24 marks in total. These A marks are likely to be more challenging and will require candidates to integrate skills, knowledge and understanding, and provide more detailed descriptions or explanations, or perhaps analyse, compare and evaluate.
So not only do the A-mark questions have to be more challenging and set in those unfamiliar contexts, they have to be spread across the sections. So 16 or 17 A marks in section 1 and 7 or 8 marks that are A-type questions in section 2 and 3 to make sure that both those optional sections are comparable in terms of demand. So it's quite a tricky balance for question writers to try and achieve.
And talking of tricky balances, Colin, let's look at what SQA says about the coverage of the skills within a question paper. As SQE writers are thinking about what questions they should ask and how challenging those questions should be, they also need to consider the skills that are being tested. The N5 and higher course specifications list 6 skills: analysis, design, implementation, testing, evaluation, and computer systems. And each of these skills must be assessed in the required allocations shown in the little table.
So obviously implementation gets the highest mark allocation with about 40% of the marks coming from there, but that's 40% across both the question paper and the assignment. So that's why the kind of range is 16 to 34 marks. Most of the implementation marks are coming through the assignment, which means it gets a reduced allocation in the question paper.
Yeah, and it's also worth pointing out here how many marks need to be allocated to design in the question paper. And this is a direct consequence of having so many implementation marks in the assignment. The question paper is always used to redress the balance at N5 and higher and ensure that candidates demonstrate a breadth of skills across the assessments.
And it's always that way we kind of jump straight into writing implementation questions because it's much easier than thinking about the design ones, particularly for those optional units of database and web. And that's what makes writing a successful assessment pretty difficult.
Yeah, indeed. It's really tough. The last thing to do here before we go on is remind everyone that questions in the question paper must sample across the breadth of the course.
So that's the questions have to also access the application of understanding, which means that straight recall questions are more or less avoided.
Yeah, and all questions must be set in meaningful context, which reinforces again what you just said, Colin, at the point that straight recall questions should be avoided.
So that's been quite a lot of information at the moment. So